Hello, hello. I hope that you are doing well and taking good care of yourself. My name is Nompumelelo Prudence Gubega. I'm a clinical psychologist and also a traditional healer. I am based in Joburg South in South Africa. Welcome to Black Couch Podcast. Today's topic is, why do people overshare? Why do adults overshare? You know, have you ever wondered, Nim, why you would come back and be like, why did I actually speak about this? Or you go into a shop and then you're there by the queue and then you find someone that comes up to you and they start telling you such intimate and very deep information, and you haven't met this person before, or you become the one that ends up oversharing. You end up saying things to people that you don't have such a close relationship with. You end up saying very intimate and personal information. And then when you come back home, you're like, why did I really share that? Sometimes you end up feeling regretful, or you end up feeling, maybe I shouldn't have. It almost feels like you have self invaded in your own privacy by voluntarily sharing the information, and you don't know how it got there. And you find that even though you are aware that you shouldn't be doing it, you keep doing it. And it then makes you feel very unsettled, because why do I keep doing this? Maybe before we can even dive into the reasons or even the signs, maybe let's just get to what is really oversharing. So oversharing is when we disclose close personal information of situations or circumstances. It happens when we feel a need to connect, or we are trying to avoid uncomfortable emotions. Sharing too much information can look different for different people. It might be talking too much about a recent divorce or a breakup or certain future plans, that you feel, oh, maybe I shouldn't have shared this because I wanted it to come to life first before I share it. Or things that you have promised yourself that you would not share with people, but you end up sharing them with people. It could also be telling a new date about your childhood traumas, like, you know, um, and not looking at, do I trust this person enough? Do I know them enough for me to be even sharing this? Because there is so much need for connection. Sometimes you find that when when people overshare, it's usually to speed up the interaction in the relation, the intimacy in the relationship. It's not taking its natural stages of maturing. But when you overshare, obviously the relationship then, or friendship, then it speeds it up. How to know that you are oversharing? You might be oversharing when you feel anxious or regretful after having a conversation or even a social media post. There's people that, remember that now we are living in an environment where we can just post anything, and we can use our pages for whatever that we want. And some of the things we end up then oversharing them, especially like on social media, because in a touch of a button, the world can know so much about you. So those kind of things where you feel very grateful, maybe after having a conversation with someone, and then you're like, should I have had that conversation? Notice that people tend to change the subject or appear uncomfortable when you talk. you know For example, like you having an uncomfortable conversation. There's someone that can just come into a conversation and speak about so much of their stuff, their marriage, and all of that. And then you find that people then start to change the subject because, like, you're making us feel um, uncomfortable because when you overshare, it's not only invasive into your own story, but it's you also invading other people's spaces in a way that they didn't consent. You don't even know that when you are oversharing, is this person in a good space to even carry what you are sharing with them? I call it emotional vomiting. When someone comes in and they don't check on how you're doing and they just emotionally vomit on you and then leave you with whatever vomit that you now have to clean after. Speaking about um, sharing deep stuff, sometimes you find that you share very deep personal information or information with someone else before even establishing the trust. Do I trust this person enough to even share this amount of information with them? How much boundaries have I created with myself to even share this amount of information with them? Have I taken the time to get to know this person or for this person to get to know me to even know if they can actually handle what I'm about to tell them? So another important thing is that there's people that feel very anxious when there is silence. So they always try to fill in the silence. And this happens because they fear rejection and also they become nervous when there is complete quietness. So what they then start to do is they start sharing so much about their own lives and their personal information as a way of not having the silent space. And sometimes it's important to have the silence because it makes you sit with your own thoughts and it helps you to think, especially before sharing anything or even talking. So it can also be because of the lack of boundaries, but it comes as a way of craving for connection and understanding. People overshare because you find relief when you overshare, because at that point, let's say like there's silence, and then when you overshare, there's a sense of relief because at least a vulnerable space has been a silent space has been filled up. Sometimes it can come from trauma or even having boundary issues, where you find that a person just comes in and they just trauma dump, without even checking on the other person. And it's because sometimes you find that the adults in their lives, they never listened to um his or her emotions, that they now start to then share so much about them, or the adults in their lives, they got to speak so much about traumas in front of a child that the child didn't learn the necessary boundaries. You also find that it's people pleasing and also fear of rejection, where if ever I give so much of myself, then it forms a connection, and then it makes it difficult for people to reject me. Or also, if I tend to share so much, it proves that I am relatable and trustworthy because I'm sharing so much information about myself, or even being in a space of feeling like any problem is supposed to be fixed by you, even with the silence or the rejection and all of that, that maybe certain things, the way that they're happening is because I'm not giving so much of myself. And then you end up giving so much of yourself, even information that you are not supposed to share. We live in a culture where social media allows us to share anything and everything. So you find that because I can just be online and get that external validation from people, then it also helps me to have that false connection with people. And if I share, then I get more interaction. And then I need more validation, more validation, more validation from people. How do we stop? How do we stop oversharing? I think it's important to firstly just to establish what is the reason that you end up oversharing, with the stuff that I've mentioned. What is the reason that you overshare? Is it because of the trauma? Is it because you fear rejection? Is it because you become too anxious? Is it because you crave connection? What is it that would make you share so much information about yourself, even information you are supposed to keep to yourself? So it's important for you to go back and look at how you are able to connect with yourself and how you are able to validate self, which will help you also understand the amount of validation that you need from other people externally. Being able to tolerate the space of silence, when there is a silent space, what does that mean to you? You know, is it more of a threat? How do you sit with the uncomfortable feeling of silence? Teaching yourself on how to sit with um, silence will help you. The uncomfortability of silence will then help your body to understand that silence is not very scary, and it's not your job to always fill in the space. Practice to pause. Once you master the art of pausing, you will then start to understand that the same thing that you might have said in a way of oversharing might not be necessary for you to overshare, you know. And in you pausing, you learn to have a conversation with yourself of, do I really need to be sharing this? By processing it for yourself, you then get to realize that maybe I shouldn't be sharing it. And then the next point is practice processing your emotions. When you have learned, I always say to people, when you sit with yourself and you process your emotions, whose voice do you hear? Once you have learned to hear your own voice, you will then start to understand that all the other voices were actually things that were said to you, but it's not really your voice. And when you start to learn to process, when sitting with your emotions, and you learn to process in a way of journaling, mindfulness, having conversations with yourself, even though people will think that you are crazy for doing that, do it anyway, because you can't be having conversations with others and not be having conversations with self. When you start to have conversations with self, you then start to learn to process your emotions. And once you start processing, you will then expect less of other people to process for you. And it will help you to have your own perspective to things before even oversharing it with someone else. So I hope that you can sit with your emotions, set boundaries, sit with why you overshare. Please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and also to comment, like as well. All right, I hope that you have an amazing week, and love and light.